Good morning, afternoon, evening, night, whatever time it is in the world for you. Welcome back to Pale Cachexia. Good morning to these characters. A soft clatter followed by an even softer gasp steered Esther from the edge of sleep, and as her eyes slowly steered open, she saw a blurry figure standing beside the bed, fiddling with something on the nightstand. After blinking a few times, she was able to make out Cena's face, a pair of bright eyes flickering towards her, sheepish, matched by an embarrassed smile. Embarrassed, you say, huh? Gah, I woke you up after all. You sure did, and after I tried so hard to be quiet. Well, you could be, I don't know, in any other room and make that objective possible. Oh well, it can't be helped, I suppose. It's fine. I should get up anyway. Man, that ordeal last night. Better she struggled to lift herself upright. Esther found she could barely move without immense, overwhelming effort. Oddly enough, it seemed different from her typical mornings of lethargy. Instead, she had the same feeling she had after her first day of work with Cena. A deep exhaustion from straining herself so much in ways she wasn't used to. It was a much stronger sensation, but not unpleasant. How is it not unpleasant, honestly? It felt almost calf-wreck. Instead, like the satisfaction of pushing to one's limits. Don't know how to pronounce that word beginning with C and ending with C. I don't think I can agree with you on that one, Esther. What you should do is rest. Real rest. Not work disguised as rest. Wow, shouldn't you be the one resting? After everything you did last night? A faint blush rose on Cena's cheeks, yeah. Her gaze fell somberly to the floor, as she seemed unable to reply for several moments, clenching the hem of her dress between her fingers. I rested plenty. Don't worry about me. Please. Really now. Something about her reassuring words sounded almost pleading, as if the last thing she wanted was for Esther to be concerned. Sitting down on the bedspread, Cena sighed quietly. The tension had broken between them, but it was impossible to ignore the difficult unspoken questions that were left behind. I'm sorry, Esther, for everything. What I said last night about not leaving me. I know you need to go home. If Papa was here, he'd probably be really happy about that idea too. And I know I can't go with you because this is my world. Maybe one day I could travel somewhere else, but I can't. Not just yet. The manor, the grounds, the forest. Taking care of this place is the only way I have left to keep my papa's memory alive. But are you keeping your papa's memory alive for your sake, or his sake? If I abandoned it now, I'd never be able to forgive myself. I'd feel haunted forever. Will always have something of his possession then, because I'm selfish. I don't want you to go, because I'll miss you. I'll miss you so much, Esther. I can't even tell you how I felt when I thought you'd left me. She put on a small self-deprecating smile as she spoke. Each word sounded as heavy as lead. Oh dear. Cena's confession brought her more sadness than it did joy. The one-sided pain of separation was something she could deal with, but knowing that Cena would miss her just as much, that seemed far more unbearable. Turning her head slowly away from Cena, she gazed out through the window into the radiant sunlight that glimmered more brightly with each passing moment. This place, it feels like another home to me. Even if it's only been a few weeks, I will never forget the time I spent here. It's probably silly, and I don't really understand why, but working together, playing together, reading together, I think those memories were the happiest ones I've ever had. I could always be myself around you, Cena. You don't know how happy that made me. And when I think about going back to a world where I have to act like everyone else, I wish I could pretend it didn't exist. But you're right. I can't stay here forever. Her eyes slowly drifted back towards Cena. My medicine will run out soon. If there's no real cure for the Pale, then I have to return to the city, to my family. I promised them. As Celia studied her in silence, her posture drooped slightly, like a wilting flower deprived of water or light, of photosynthesis or hydration. The other way around. The somber, lonely weight in her expression drew Esther's mind back to that night by the pond, when Sina had spoken of her father's decline. Esther, when you leave... She lowers her head slightly, biting her lip. She was hoping for something else, like a cure being found. Would you ever come back? Of course I would. As long as I have your father's mausoleum key, that would be. I don't know when, but... Then I'll wait for you. Sina's quiet reply interrupted her. I didn't quietly say that! She looked up to see the other girl, gazing at her with fierce determination. No matter how long you're gone, I'll really wait for you, I promise. Even if we're apart for years and years, I'll always be here to welcome you back. I don't care how long it takes, or how different you might be, or if you only walked by to wave at me before moving on. As long as I know I'll see you again someday. That's all that matters. Wow. She didn't understand why, but beyond any shadow of a doubt, she knew they would meet again. It's a promise, then. I'll come back. If you don't, I'll be really cross with you. But how can you be cross with us if we don't come back? Really? Really? Wow. For goodness sakes, you two. It's like we two are meant to be best friends forever or something like that. Or something more. Lean forward, Esther curled her arms around the smaller girl, put her into a gentle hug. Sina snuggled tightly around her, but faint warmth of her teardrops soaking into Esther's blouse. For a long time they held each other in silence. It felt solemn and bittersweet, as if they were already saying farewell, even though it would surely be a while longer before Esther left. But in that moment, they finally understood each other. Their promise was sealed, forever set in stone by their shared determined belief in it. A belief that would never ever waver, no matter what. You say that now, not until the very end of time. Well, that's a promise and a half. That's a promise and a half in itself, being wavered until the end of time. Finally they pulled away slightly, sitting before one another, clasping each other's hands. And something seemed different about Sina. There was a deep resolve in her eyes, hidden behind the gentle way she gazed at Esther. I have a silly question for you, Esther. If you were cured of the Pale, what's the first thing you'd think you'd do? Break my watch, I think. Yeah, it stabbed me one too many times. After a short pause, Sina Gill was softly shaking her head. I can understand that. I know it's a funny thing to ask. I was just curious. For whatever reason, Esther's replies seemed to have made her happy. Well, I think you ought to eat a bit of breakfast, then get some more sleep. I left your favourites on the nightstand. How do you know what my favourites are? I've not even told you my favourites. Maybe I have. The tea's probably gotten cold by now, though. I think I'll survive. I hope so. You deserve better than to perish from cold tea, really. If you need me, I'll be out in the garden. Or downstairs. But I'll see you later. Alright? Okay, she nodded. No matter how little time they had left together, it still brought her such relief to have things back to normal. Or as normal as things could be. What is normal? There's no such thing as normal. Each day is different, so it can't be normal. There's no such thing as normality. Once Sina had hopped off the bed and left the room with a cheery wave. Esther pulled over her tray of breakfast. She hadn't realized it up until now, but she was ravenously hungry, so much that her stomach actually hurt a little when she began to eat. No, not the stomach pains. Afterwards, a sense of drowsy contentment settled over her, drawing her towards the tempting arms of sleep. She yearned to go outside and work with Xena, not wanting to waste her remaining time in the forest, but her body still felt too weak. Without more rest, she likely wouldn't even be able to get downstairs. So dark. When her eyelids slowly struggled open, it felt like her whole head was in a fog. This could be another nightmare. She could glimpse a trace of moonlight from the window. Had she really slept through the whole day? Her body must have been even weaker than she thought it was. And then, slowly Esther attempted to pull herself up to her feet. Her legs were still a little unsteady, but she felt far better than she had before. Xena was probably waiting for her downstairs. Perhaps Esther could still make it in time to help her friend with dinner. Just as she was about to make her way towards the bedroom door, something strange suddenly caught Esther's eye. A pile of papers resting on the nightstand. They hadn't been there before. Xena? At first she thought it might have been something Xena wrote, but when she looked more closely at the scribbled handwriting, no, it couldn't be Xena. Isaiah! These pages. They were the missing part of Isaiah's treatise on the Ethereal. When had Xena found them? Or had Xena always had them? Her confusion and shock were soon consumed by desperate curiosity. After hastily lighting a candle, she leaned over the nightstand and began to read. Missing ones, or perhaps they were never there in the first place. A new, willing host. The environment must also be suitable. In this case, an area that attracts a large number of ethereal, due to the concentrated essences of either the living or the dead. If a current sufferer and another unafflicted human are brought together in such a place, and the new host accepts the entirety of the sufferer's burden onto themselves, the Pale will lift, and all the ethereal will be drawn to the emotional energy within the new host's body. The effects of the transfer are impossible to fully predict, but in the majority of cases, the host will no longer be able to function. There is only one other cure that I can ascertain for this mysterious, relentless ailment. I refer to it as the ascension of the afflicted, the progress of their body into something that can live in harmony with the ethereal. This has occurred with breathtaking rarity, yet for those who did ascend, they were destined to become unforgettable and beloved figures in all ages to come. That last part there I don't really understand. To the best of my knowledge, there is no singular way of ascension to occur. In fact, the ways are infinite. That is precisely why this method is nigh unachievable, for we cannot possibly say what defines it. And when we find it, we'll surely be dead by then, so we can't literally write it down on a book. For some, it was a sudden flash of clarity beyond the fabric of our universe, our knowledge of space-time. For others, it struck them after endless meditation, study, and pilgrimages of both mind and body. And for a select few, it came from only long, fathomless, inescapable solitude. We humans have not yet evolved to the stage of consciously achieving such a cure, and for now, it remains beyond our realm of comprehension. Indeed, perhaps the Ethereal were never meant to be understood by us. If that is the case, then no amount of scientific research will ever obtain a true cure for the Pale. However, I believe a singularity lies at the end of the arcane primordial path. All who have learned to walk hand in hand with these spirits speak to a final destination, a last door, an end that leads into a new beginning, a place the Ethereal would lead us all, but in our weakness, we mistake their guidance for twisted malice. What lies at the end of that path, the languages of speech, art, and mathematics will never reveal, for ultimately, it spans beyond what thoughts and knowledge our limited minds may yet contain. All we can surmise is that there, and only there, at the threshold of this mortal world and all the unseen dimensions beyond it, The Pale Cachexia becomes a gateway of transformation for the very soul itself. Wow, what a read that was. And no, there still isn't a potential cure for it, because a cure means eradicating the virus, or in this case a parasite. Transferring the Pale, or sending, both seemed virtually impossible, albeit for different reasons. Was that really all he had written, the only possible cures? If so, then... to her surprise, there was another piece of paper attached to Isaiah's writings. The ink still looked fresh. A note from Cena. An ominous pressure welled in her chest, just like last time. Esther tried to force it back, but as she held up Cena's note to the candlelight, her hands began to shake slightly. Do not shake, for it may come in contact with the flame of the candle itself, and then the note will be lost forever. Dear Esther, I hope you can forgive me. A few days ago, I found these papers, and I've been hiding them in my wardrobe ever since. I was afraid you'd leave as soon as you found them, but even more than that, I felt so guilty. Guilty for being too afraid to help you. Guilty of knowing what Papa would think too. Until last night. I never realized how important you were to me until you left. When I found you lying in the forest and I thought you were dead. You looked like a corpse even though you were still breathing. I don't want to see you like that ever again. I think I'd go insane if I did. So I've made up my mind. I promised I'd help you no matter what. And if Papa was right, if the Afro truly are real, then I can help you after all. But how though? You deserve happiness, Esther. How can you help us? You have people back in the city waiting for you, and once you're cured, you'll be able to live a normal life again. And I'm not afraid anymore. If there's a chance I could cure you forever, I'll do anything. Anything at all. When you're ready, come meet me in the place we promised to go together. I don't know what will happen, or if it will even work, but I want to try. Please don't be too angry with me. I only want to make you happy. She hoping to become that part of the ascension then. To be the transferred body. The note fell from her fingers. For a moment she stood there completely stunned, at a loss of how to process everything and respond. Did Cena? Did she want to... Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well. Did she want to transfer the illness to herself? Impossible. Esther would never agree to such a thing. Ugh. But she was already in the mausoleum, the Aphoril. They were down there. From Messiah's writings and her own dream, she knew they were there. If they lashed onto Cena in the same way they had to her father, was she already lying down there, alone in the dark, paralyzed? There was no other choice. She had to go down there, down into the mausoleum. She had to stop her friend's attempt to cure her. Cena's life was a trade she would never ever accept. This was her burden, she felt. Esther dashed down the stairs so quickly, her feet barely touched the floor. She was levitating above the floor. Within a few moments she was outside, racing across the manor grounds in a frantic sprint. Do you have your watch with you, though? She didn't even feel the sting of exertion in her lungs, nor the impact on her legs. She couldn't feel anything at all, only a sinking, helpless fear. Why? Why was Cena doing this? She must have known that Esther would never have willingly agreed to it. But why would she risk her own life and happiness? Didn't she realize how devastated Esther would be if anything happened to her? And who are we speaking of again as his third person? It was so rash, so naive, such a horribly reckless thing to do. And what would happen if it actually worked? Is the mausoleum door open, though? A few minutes later she dashed into the graveyard, pushing through the underbrush in desperate panic. Is she there, facing her from across the cemetery? The mausoleum door stood open, waiting. But instead of calling out to her with that same golden glow from her dream, she felt a primal sense of revulsion and fear, as if every bone in her body was begging for her to turn away. But what is greater, that fear, or your resolve to find your friend? As she approached the gaping stone maw, Dread crept through her with a sickening chill. It took the entirety of her willpower to force her body forwards, each step more difficult than the last. When she finally crossed the threshold and her uneven paces echoed coldly around her, she wondered if she would ever make it back again. Now it's the time to stand in this place. Physically, at the bottom of those long winding stairs, the crypt opened up before her. It looked identical to the one Esther had seen in her dream, only colder and more oppressive, lacking any of the strange sense of comfort she'd felt. Do you have any flowers on you so you can mark your way? Cena! She sounded so frail, but she was terrified. Terrified of what might hurt. What? Terrified of what might hear her. Okay, I see what you mean now. Terrified of what she might be waiting around the corner. No. Not this scenario again, but in the real world there's bones there. Summoning all of her courage, Esther began to walk down the long, dark corridor, past rows and rows of tombs, opened and unopened, separated by the tall statues that washed over them. She paid no attention to her path, where she'd come from, or how she'd make her way out again. All she could think about was how Cena would be when she found her. Alive? Dead? Infected? In the note, she had said Esther had looked like a corpse. Would she have to see Cena like that too? Very curious. As she rounded the next corner, her foot suddenly hit something. When she hesitantly bent down to pick it up, her fingers brushed against a dusty, soft material. And what would that material be? A stuffed white toy! A cat? What was it doing here? Surely it must have been Cena's. Perhaps it was a sign that she was getting close. Perhaps it was a sign that you should not have misplaced that cat, for that was the only way that you could get back. Clinging desperate about hope, she broke into a spirit. Sprint. One last chance. Turn back. When those unbidden words rose in her head, Esther forced them away. She wouldn't turn back. No matter what, she would never turn back. If they were truly in her head, then they would understand why. What is this place, and who were the last people here besides Isaiah to inhabit this place? She came to a sudden halt, there, curled up on the ground beside a casket. Cena? She fell to her knees. Cena? Esther? You finally came. Her eyes slowly opened, and she gave Esther a small, gentle smile. Why did you do this? As she reached out for Cena with a trembling hand. Esther felt something right behind her. And suddenly it felt like she was floating, as if an indescribable weight had lifted from her shoulders, leaving her body as light as a feather. The constant stream of her muscles was gone. The burden of her voice, the heaviness in her chest, vanished altogether. She remembered this feeling. She had been so young then, always so happy. So this was the ascension that note was talking about. Slowly, the dark, cold walls and floors around her dissolved into nothingness. Cena? Cena, please! And she shook the other girl in her arms, staring at her face in slowly dawning terror. She realized that Cena wasn't truly unconscious. She had simply gone limp, resting in Esther's arms with eerie stillness, like a rag doll. Her features were composed in a calm, nearly blank expression, like a funeral mask, beautiful and reserved. But the faintest trace of a smile still lingered on her lips. Underneath her eyelids, not fully closed, Esther could see a glimmer of grey. Oh no. No! No, this wasn't supposed to happen! You can't have it! I won't let you have it! I won't, Cena! Cena! Her anguished, frustrated scream echoed all around them, but Cena showed no response. Please, Please take me instead. I'll give you all of it. Everything I have. Just let Cena go. Don't make her suffer. I won't let her suffer. I won't let you, Cena. I won't. But how are you gonna do it then? She repeated those words over and over again, begging and pleading between her sobs. She didn't want to be cursed like this. She would rather live with the Pale forever. She would live with it forever. If only they would bring Cena back. Wow. And then, an enormous darkness crashed down over her, powerful, suffocating, pushing her down, far past the depths of consciousness. She could feel herself sinking, detaching from her body, from her very soul, becoming nothing more than a thought, a tiny fragment of existence, floating away from the world, from any sense of herself. At first it terrified her. Was she dying? Already dead? Would she be trapped forever in this sense of nothingness? But slowly her fears began to wane. In a moment, or perhaps in eternity, she realized she wasn't being destroyed at all. She was being separated, taken apart like a broken watch, hoping to be put together again someday, dissolved into her essential parts, the indivisible atoms of consciousness, so that she could be remade. Perhaps it was the Athral who were unraveling her, deconstructing her, as a reward for her complete surrender. Strangely enough, she trusted them. She knew somehow that they were taking her somewhere very, very important. It brought her such relief that she wished she could cry, though without a body, she had nothing to shed her tears with. Where is this next journey then? At last, just before her awareness of everything vanished completely, she felt happy. Happy and yet lonely. Strangely lonely. Alone for a very, very, very long time. But perhaps that was alright. We're back in the forest now. Perhaps there was so much to do today. Planting, weeding, cleaning, researching, cooking, so this was Isaiah then. But little chores always seemed to grow more daunting around this time of year. It made sense after all. Spring was the season where everything had to be set in motion for the upcoming months. But despite the daunting prospect of such preparations, something about the cool, light breeze felt so reinvigorating. It seemed to promise a fresh start, a chance for something new and exciting right around the next corner, leaving all the years and mistakes of the past behind, taking the knowledge from old failures to create something new, something that would flourish in the fertile soil left behind. No matter how jaded and cynical one grew, it was impossible not to look on with just a little hope, clinging to the tiniest chance that this time, things would be different. What do you mean by this time? And something beautiful would finally bear fruit. But I doubt it would be the case. That would be Jan Cena. Papa? Stirred from his thoughts, he glanced down to the small figure walking beside him. She'd been tugging his arm gently to get his attention, but he hadn't noticed up until now. Could I ask you something, Papa? Please? Yes, unless it's about your biology lessons. I won't allow you to weasel your way out of completing the last chapter like you managed to yesterday. No, I'll finish it today, I promise. But I wanted to ask you about something else. Okay, I'll go ahead then. Cena felt unusually silent, her gaze drifting down to the forest floor. Such behaviour from her was so rare that Isaiah's brows ached in uncertain anticipation. Papa? Will I ever have a friend someday? Isaiah is your friend. A friend? She nodded shyly, hesitating for a few moments before continuing. I love you, Papa. You know I really, really do, but I wish I had a friend, someone else like me. All the storybook people have such lovely friends. They go on adventures, and have long talks, and cheer each other up when they're sad. It makes me so lonely when I read about them. Well, this was not a discussion he particularly wants to have. He had talked about this with her many, many times already. Strangers would never bring anything good or fruitful into her life. Yep, but that is the thing that parents would like to push down onto their child, the burdens of the world, but they don't reflect the good of the world, so the only thing that the parents do would only talk about the negatives of the world, rather than trying to put a mixed balance in between, like, yep, there are these aspects, but there are also these aspects. The temporary excitement would always fade, and eventually only troubles and turmoil would remain in its wake. He was about to sternly remind Cena of such a thing, before she could get any more fanciful ideas about adventures and shallow conversations. But when he looked down at her, and saw a soft familiar wistfulness gazing back at him in her eyes, something fractured in his heart. Wow. Like you didn't know how to respond back to that one, huh? Unlike the last times. Finally, with a long sigh of defeat, he halted mid-stride and turned to face her. Cena eagerly peered back up at him, hugging her stuffed cat against her chest while she waited for his reply. If you should ever have a friend, you ought to love them like your life depends on it. Aha. Friendship is not something to be taken lightly. You cannot befriend anyone just because they treat you nicely, or perform a few paltry favours for you here and there. How many of his own friendships have been built on such things? Most of them, surely. That was why they had all eventually frayed and fallen apart. Except for Jimian. Sometimes that man could listen so quietly and patiently, as I wonder if he wasn't just a figment of his imagination. Jeremiah? I don't know how to pronounce these names, unfortunately, sorry. Friendship, love, means trusting someone fully, treasuring them, trying to understand them, caring for their happiness like you care for own, if not more so. You must believe in them, believe the best of them, always, and they must offer you the same support, as far as you both can carry each other. It is a hard, heavy responsibility to bear on one's shoulders, Cena. If two people do not share it equally, one will be crushed beneath its weight. She somewhat noddly. It seemed like she was intently absorbing his every word, committing it deeply in her memory. With a true friend, you share each other's sorrow and delight, and when one of you falls, the other is there to help you back to their feet. No sacrifice is too great. A friend's pain, a friend's life, becomes an extension of one's own, symbiotic, and only when the depth of their selfless loyalty is returned, when it is truly mutual to the bottom of the soul, then and only then are two people joined in a way that can never be broken. Do you understand, Cena? I do, Papa. She nodded again, her features clouded by an unusually sober expression. She'd been asking about this subject quite frequently as of late. He needed to have a proper serious conversation with her soon. A lecture about how the isolation was for her own good, and how any relationship in the real world would never match the perfect bonds as such seen in fiction. They're never seen in the real world as they're seen in fiction. That's why we have fiction, to escape the real world. But right now, he couldn't bring himself to say anything more. He knew that pressing it further would hurt her feelings at the very least, and most likely result in some kind of quarrel, just like last time. Or maybe it didn't even happen yet. What is the time frame of these memories? Also, another thing as well is that, are these Cena's dreams? Like, she's dreaming these scenarios where she is with her father, or as her father. Or is it Esther who's dreaming as the father? Or Cena? Or it could just be none of the above. Or all of the above, I don't know. That is all I will say on this subject for the moment. You'd be wise to ruminate on my words before we speak of it again. Reaching out, he grasped her tiny hand firmly in his own. She stayed contemplatively silent, but still offered him a small, affectionate smile. Together, they set out once more, their footsteps lightly crunching in the grass. For some reason, a strange sadness now weighed down Isaiah's heart. Just by himself, he couldn't help but envision Sina running through a vibrant patch of flowers, followed by another girl, one calm and patient enough to balance out his daughter's endless energy. But then again, that takes energy in itself to be calm. Perhaps they would laugh and talk and cry, and share their deepest thoughts with one another. An honest, gentle bond that could never be strained by judgment or betrayal or selfish misdeeds. But something so pure and loving, something that might remain untainted by all the sorrows and cares of the declining world it resided in. Surely it could never, ever truly exist. Something in the form of Esther definitely did that, though, did it not, in the future? A future in which you never lived to see, unfortunately, as we're back here? What? The fuzzy cloud of her daydream slowly disappeared. She'd gotten lost in her memories again. It happened quite often these days, although she didn't mind. There are so many good memories stored away, like beautiful books in a library. It would be a shame not to pull them out and admire them now and then. After all, it would be so very lonely without them. Drawing back from the window, she slowly turned towards the old canopy bed, lying there, so perfectly serene and peaceful, the ever-sleeping figure of her beautiful friend. Her chest slowly rose and fell with the same unchanging breaths, a constant rhythm. But she never once had she opened her eyes. How did they get back here then from the mausoleum? How did they get back here from the mausoleum? 6 years apart says that... Okay, it's been that long. There are no words on how Sina felt once she realized what she'd done. In trying to cure Esther, she pushed herself into a deep coma, one from which there seemed to be no awakening. At first, Sina was beyond terrified. She didn't know how she could possibly care for Esther while the other girl was in such a state. But after she carried her back to the manor, and stayed by her side for many painful days and nights, she realized something impossible had happened. Esther's body had gone into a strange, incredible stasis, requiring no food or drink. The very fundamentals of her biology had changed, and yet for some unknown reason, she continued to grow and age normally. It was as if the spirits themselves were sustaining her somehow. Or perhaps, as if she was living in a different world altogether, even though her body remained mirrored in this one. After she had cried all the tears she possibly could, and finally managed to control the guilt and anguish that plagued her, Sina slowly began to adapt again. She decided she would go on living and caring for Esther, waiting for her eventual awakening. The other girl's slumber was a constant reminder of her mistake, even though she didn't think Esther would have ever blamed her. Sina dreamed she would wake up with that weary, playful smile of hers, and disarm every apology with a calm shake of her head. After such a long sleep, though, hopefully, she would still remember all the time they'd spent together, and wouldn't look upon Sina as a stranger once more. But the more she studied her friend's peaceful face, the more Sina began to wonder something. She didn't really know if Esther was fully asleep. Perhaps part of her was still conscious. If that was the case, then it would be terribly lonely and quiet in the darkness. Most likely, she was far away in a dream, or in another place entirely. But, just in case, Sina decided to always keep her company. So, from what I imagine, I've forgotten their name now, begins with A. They took a part of Esther and kept her there within that world. But what's behind is a shell of Esther, one that is walking, but without all of the lights on. After a few days of tinkering with a chair and an old wheelbarrow, she managed to create a sturdy wheelchair that could easily handle the forest floor. Now, while she worked in the garden and the graveyard, Sina could take Esther along with her. As strange as it had felt at first, she eventually began to chat away just like before, describing the birds, the trees, the colours of the changing seasons. She would tell Esther how much she missed her, how excited she was to play and work together again, reminding her of their promise and how cross she'd be if Esther never came back. I'm really confused here. Sometimes a part of her wondered if she wasn't just going mad, and all of her efforts were utterly for naught. But if there was only the tiniest, faintest chance that Esther could hear her, that one day she'd open her eyes and smile again, sharing the same memories of those long, quiet years, then she would keep tending to her friend until the very end of their days. Wow. Oh, didn't mean to go full screen there. Settling down on the bed, she delicately cupped her palm against Esther's cheek. Warm, just like always. After her eyes so lightly closed, as if they might flutter open at any moment. It's another beautiful day, Esther. I'll pick some flowers for your hair today, I think. A tiny, gentle smile traced over Sina's lips. If Esther could really hear her, Sina thought she might like that idea. Even if she wouldn't be able to see the flowers, she might feel their gentle weight on her head, or breathe in their fresh scent. And most importantly, she would know Sina was still with her, waiting for her to wake up. If you were cured of the pale, what's the first thing you'd think you'd do? Break my watch, I think. It stabbed me one too many times. With her friend's words always echoing her mind, Sina kept Esther's watch with her wherever she went. So many times she dreamed of seeing Esther suddenly open her eyes before hurling her much despised medicine onto the ground. Even if the crash that startled Sina awake was an imaginary one, it sounded so vivid, so real and clear, that it almost felt like a premonition instead of a dream. Back here. Let's go then, shall we? The sun's getting bright and warm again, so I'll make sure to keep you in the shade. Maybe we'll stop by the stream too. I'll remember not to lose my rhythm this time, she murmured softly to Esther, pausing a few moments. A reply never came, but that didn't dishearten her, or make her doubt what she knew to be true. She would keep her promise. She would wait for Esther to return. Perhaps it would take today. Perhaps it would be today, or tomorrow, or 20 years in the future. Perhaps it would be another life altogether. No matter how long it took, Esther would always be there, waiting to welcome Esther. Sina would always be there, waiting for me with words. No matter how long it took, Sina would always be there, waiting to welcome Esther back. As long as she's always believed in it, and never lost faith in their eternal promise. Then one day, they would be together again. So, it's a comatose state. But it only appeared once Esther got Sina back to the house, tearing down the walls of eternity. Wow. What a story and a half that was. What a dark fantasy that that definitely is. Like, everything about it was quite tightly written in a way. Like, there wasn't much room for thinking, but at the same time there was a lot of thinking because you can always draw your own conclusions from these kind of tales. But the entire story was built around this ethereal entities being a thing of the other world and something that people should never be able to approach. But my thought and question is, because the ethereal could possibly be the origin of the curse in the first place, would it mean that to be cured, you have to sacrifice a part of yourself in order for your physical body to be cured? So your consciousness would then be faded away. With Isaiah though, he wants to escape, but with Esther, she accepted. So both of them in their own ways received death, but the physical state of both characters were different in a way. Like, one of them is here, but the other one is eaten up as a punishment. But the other one is kind of like an award, or a reward. Argent Games. So yeah. Thank you for playing. That was such a cliffhanger though. I'm honestly wanting to see what would happen in the future if Esther ever truly wakes up. But that could be an interpretation for you to decide whether she actually did awaken or not. Did she actually come about from this comatose state? Extra, let's see, 1, 2, 3. There's nothing else to it. Credits we've just been through. Music, we won't listen to it. Some of these, actually some of these are actually copyrighted because I've received copyright strikes on my videos. Prefs. Accessibility. Disable bright flashes, audio cue subtitles, open dyslexic font. No thank you. I really like that game. It's a tale between what was once upon a time two strangers, and now they have this inseparable trust bond with each other in a way that they can't really describe it in words, but it is definitely there. And that last dream with Isaiah and Cena together was actually something that reflected Cena's intentions when going down into the mausoleum. Like, that last bit of the dream was a reflection upon Cena's conviction to rid her friend of the Pale. And in a way it did work. Like, the Pale was gone from Esther because, well, she didn't have the watch on her, I believe, when the conclusion came about, when Esther was in that comatose state. But there would definitely be room for a possible sequel of this tale if there would ever be one. But I think sometimes leaving things off a cliffhanger is the best way about it. Because you can drop your own conclusions to say, did she ever awaken from it? Did Cena ever cry at night? Possibly going over the fact that her friend may never awaken from her comatose state. But I think with the nature of how the paranormal goes about, and if they indeed taken her consciousness away from her physical body, then it would be the case that Esther would never awaken. Like, her soul was taken away, her consciousness was taken away from her body. So therefore, it would never be possible unless the Aphro decided that we've decided to put you back in your body. We believe that you are worthy of living without the Pale. You've gone through such suffering and endured so much, and with such conviction on board your shoulders, that we decided that you're going to be an exception and let you go throughout the other souls that they have consumed. And probably perhaps they consumed them because of the method in which Isaiah had tried to do. Like, they tried to escape from the Aphrodite, and from there they decided that he was somebody that should not exist because of his methods of trying to escape the Pale. But it didn't work out for him. And I think where Esther found the key was where Isaiah died. Like, the insects and stuff that eaten him alive, they didn't eat the key because obviously why would they eat metal? Or whichever material it would be. But thank you so much for watching, guys. This has been Pale Cachexia. There's a link down in the description below where you'll be able to find this game for yourselves and purchase it for yourselves. Thank you so much for watching, and take care of yourselves.